Time for more money with Matt Moore and Jay Money. All right, as we look at the series pricing, let's start there. Wolves were at 14 to 1 on Tuesday to win this series. And now that they've extended the series, they're at plus 425, and the Mavs are at minus 550. Matt, what do you make of all that?
Yeah, so we're looking at about, an 11 percentage point differential in the implied from 18% to win the series from 7%, right? So that's like a pretty massive jump. Something to keep in mind here is that the Wolves have a pretty huge liability at the books. The books have a huge liability on the Wolves, I should say. They have just simply taken on so much money on the Wolves throughout the regular season when the Wolves were the 1 seed and then the 2 seed. And then they took on more really in that Denver series. And so they have this huge kind of liability. And we've seen that reported across most of the books here in the US. And so I do think there's like a pretty big liability, and that's guiding a lot of why this moves so much, because they still had that liability before game 4, obviously. However, the idea of them coming back started to kind of percolate. You started to see like a little bit of conversation of like, well, look, the Wolves have been in these games. It has been close. And so the books are basically saying, we don't want any more Wolves money. We do not like this price at
Yeah.
plus 450 for a team down 3-1 when no one has ever come back from 3-0. That is saying we don't want any more Wolves money. That price is way too short. So the value is not really there. So that to me is kind of how to read this, is that this is mostly a reaction from the books based off of their current liability and the fact that they are not interested in taking on any more money on the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Well, speaking of how long this series could go, Jay, when do you see this series ending? Is Ant right? Is he going to see people again in Dallas? How many games do you think this goes?
Well, they will be back in Dallas. That's something I do think. I think it'll maybe go 6 games, but it all matters about Derek Lively, in my opinion. Like if he comes back in the next game, for game 5, I wouldn't be surprised if the Mavs did win that game. But it maybe looks like Lively is still a little banged up. Like he didn't even want to stand up too much in for game 4 over there. So if Lively's still out, I do think it goes to at least 6 games. But if the Mavs were to win this series, I wouldn't see them losing game 6 at the house. They know that would be basically games like you don't want to go to Minnesota for game 7. I know that Minnesota was able to win in Denver for game 7, but I don't think this series, especially after starting off 3-0, I think whenever Lively comes back, if he comes for game 6, that's where the series we're in. It's really that simple to me.
Game 6 to me is too easy. It's too Minnesota fans don't get off that easy. It's got to be more torturous. It's got to be more painful. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna say game 7 here. I think that it's game 7 and then the Mavericks win. Like the Mavericks did this to the Suns a couple of years ago, winning in Phoenix. Jay, like when you look at some of the numbers, I will say we're kind of seeing this weird pattern, right? Like Dallas in 2022 goes on the road and absolutely stomps the Suns in game 7. Minnesota goes down by 20, comes back and wins in Denver. Last year, the Celtics forced game 7 back in Boston and the Heat blow them out. I'm
Yeah.
starting to get a little concerned about what is a small sample, but overall trend here for teams at home in game 7. Game 7 home teams used to be a lock. And now I'm a little bit more worried about it. I will say the Wolves have been in every game in this series with a chance to win. I love Dallas in the series going in. I gave them out, bet them. I have -1.5 and straight up plus 140. However, the longer this series goes, Minnesota's getting a little bit better at the matchups. They're moving in the right direction. And the Mavericks, I don't necessarily know that they have a lot of things that they can do to tweak and counter and go that the other way, because I'm not sure that the things that Jason Kidd did versus the Clippers, say, playing Maxi Kleber next to one of the bigs, I don't think that works versus this two big lineup for the Wolves. That plays more into Minnesota's hands. Game 4 was the first game in the series that was in Minnesota's kind of wheelhouse. It was a defensive game. For as much as everyone talks about, well, Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards played better, they did. But the Mavs had a 105 defensive rating. That's where the Wolves want this series. In the prior games, the Mavs were averaging about a 117 to 120 offensive rating in each game. As much as Dallas' defense has improved, that's where they want this. They need this to be an offensive series. Minnesota needs it defensive. And we see in these series, when they go longer, we see the totals start to come down because they do get more grinded out. The Mavs need to wrap this up, because I am a little bit concerned if you let this go with how Minnesota is adapting. That's going to be a problem. I agree with Jay that Derek Lively is a huge factor in the series. He's been great in every series. He has the best, I think the second best plus minus of any rookie in NBA playoff history, which is phenomenal. But the Mavs are also getting killed in Daniel Gafford's minutes, and they've gotten some outlier performances from him in the last 2 games. If that starts to just tilt a little bit, if Lively comes down a little bit in his impact, and Gafford stays where he is, that leans more into the Wolves. Again, not saying I'm like rushing out to bet Minnesota here at all, because nobody's ever come back from 3-0. But I do think there's a possibility this thing goes 7 before the Wolves finally Minnesota themselves.
Well, I do feel like a 7-game series would be fitting for the Wild West of this season. But just to be clear, Matt, real quick, you're not saying there's a chance that Minnesota actually wins this thing.
No one's ever done it. Like, no one's ever done it. And like, look, I was on Mavs in game 4. My profile picture on Twitter is currently a Mavs fan that she took photo that she took with Jaden McDaniels, because I was like, they're done tonight. She's like, you want to bet? And I was like, all right, we'll do profile pictures. No one's ever done it. Beating Dallas 4 in a row. I don't think Dallas is this elite team that everyone seems to think that they are. I think they're a really good team. And I don't think you're beating a good team 4 straight times, twice in Dallas. I can't get there. So I think whether it's game 5, game 6, or game 7, I just can't see Minnesota pulling this off.
Now, Jay, if this series continues to extend, how much of an advantage does that give to Boston in the NBA Finals?
Think it would be a huge advantage. So the Celtics are coming off. I mean, each one of their series have been pretty easy. Each one of the Mavs and the Wolves, well, maybe not the first series for the Wolves, but if it is the Mavs that get it done, which they should get it done, if they are, I mean, they've went both of their series have won at least 6 games versus the Clippers and versus the Thunder, and if they go another 6 or 7 games versus the Wolves here, they're gonna be a lot more gas going up against a Boston team that's been the best team all year. They're rested, they're ready to go. They'll probably have Porzingis back, ready to go as well. So it'll be a major advantage for the Celtics, in my opinion.
Yeah, for me, this gets into more kind of, we look at series script, right? So teams that are at home and they have a rest advantage over the opponents, they've gotten more rest than the opponent in the NBA Finals for game 1 and are at home. They're 8-2 in those finals games 1. This is just 10 games, but 8-2 is a pretty big gap there. That's 80%, 8 out of 10 times they've gone on to win game 1. Well, guess what? Teams that win game 1 of the NBA Finals at home have gone on to win 78% of the time via whowins.com. So this is, to me, is part of the problem. If the Mavs want to pull off this upset versus the Celtics, they need to steal game 1. Game 1s have not been strong for the Mavericks. They've lost 2 of the 3. They did beat the Wolves, but they've lost 2 of the 3 matchups in the NBA playoffs. If you get behind, I think, versus Boston, I think it gets really tough. Even if they come back and they steal game 2, like the Heat did, like the Cavaliers did, Boston has kind of proven that they will wake up and still be able to handle it. I don't think Dallas can look at this and go, we'll win both at home, because Dallas hasn't been good in these playoffs at home either. Like, they've lost more games at home than they have on the road. So if we look at those kind of factors here, that's where this rest disadvantage kind of comes into play, where if this, especially, look, if it's 5, I don't think it matters. Like, that's Thursday. You're still talking a week that the Mavericks get off in order to get healthy, get right, get rested. That, to me, kind of negates a lot of this. But if this goes to 6 or 7, now we're talking about an exhausting series, especially if this goes 7. That's a disaster for anybody that's been betting against Boston, because teams tend to lose those subsequent series, and Boston will have had all this time off. One thing I do want to say, though, we're probably going to hear about this. I don't want to hear about Boston being over the rest versus rust thing. They have been rested every single round of the playoffs, and they've lost twice. Like, I just think that we need to probably give Boston a little bit of credit for they have breezed through this season and managed themselves very well. If they lose game 1, it's because Boston's not good enough, not because of the rest versus rust factor.
I'm not making any promises that won't come up, but I will just say we have seen living proof in this postseason. Minnesota, that 7-game series against Denver, absolutely drained them every which way. They didn't have time to wrap their heads around, okay, we still got another team left to play here. And then also the Pacers. Like, the Pacers were completely, like, they were okay in game 1. I get that against Boston, but like, that 7-game series against the Knicks absolutely came back to haunt them. Okay, talking game 5 tomorrow. Jay, what's your best bet?
Yeah, I like Kyrie Irving under 23.5 points. It is a small play for me, but obviously going under with anybody at points, especially with the Mavs having a lot better offense in this series, is a little bit scary. But the Wolves made a really nice defensive adjustment for Game 4. It's something that they should have probably did after Game 2, in my opinion. They put Anthony Edwards on Luka, and they put Jaden McDaniels on Kyrie. Really bothered Kyrie out there. He only went, he was held to 6 of 18 for shooting for 16 points as well. A lot of people say he had a bad game. I don't think it was on Kyrie. It was on Jaden McDaniels. This guy is a tall, lengthy type of guy, and it really bothered Kyrie over there as well. So a ton of more size to on Kyrie there is making it a lot harder for him. And I'll take a shot with his under 23.5 points. It's my best bet for Game 5.
Maria, can I just say real quick? I'm not betting absolutely anything on this game. I have zero idea. I don't want any part of this game.
I'm with
I don't.
you.
Jay's been rock solid on props in the NBA playoffs, as he always is with all of his bets. So like that's a good play. I am terrified of this game. I have zero idea of what to expect. I do not know how this one's gonna go.
Fair enough. I will say this on the Jaden McDaniels point. I could be wrong. I don't think I heard him say anything about the fact that he was going to be guarding Kyrie. Unlike Anthony Edwards, I'm not saying he was even trying to talk trash or anything. He was just like, yeah, I want to guard Kyrie, and didn't work out so great. But Kyrie did look totally different in Game 4 with the 16 points, averaged almost 28 points across the first 3 games. All right, Jay, Matt, thank you.